Hunger and cold ended more lives in medieval winters than battles ever did. Yet a few families knew techniques that kept them fed for months, even in the harshest storms. It's been buried by time, but learning it now could change how you survive the next hard winter. One key secret was the use of underground ice pits to keep food fresh without modern tools. Underground ice pits were medieval refrigeration systems that kept food fresh without any electricity bills. Medieval people dug deep pits and harvested winter ice blocks, creating natural cooling that could last through warmer months when fresh food would normally spoil in hours. Medieval people basically built walk-in freezers using nothing but shovels and winter weather. While we panic when the power goes out and our fridges stop working, they were storing ice underground that kept food cold for months without any moving parts or repair bills. The process started with winter ice harvesting. Families would cut thick blocks from frozen ponds, lakes, or rivers when temperatures stayed below freezing for weeks. These ice blocks were then carefully transported to prepared underground pits that had been dug below the frost line. Ice pits were dug 4 to 6 feet deep, sometimes deeper depending on local climate conditions. The deeper you went, the more consistent the temperature stayed year-round. These weren't just holes in the ground either. Smart construction included drainage systems to handle melted water and prevent flooding. Insulation was the key to making ice last from winter through summer. Medieval people layered straw, sawdust, moss, or dried leaves around and over the ice blocks. These organic materials created air pockets that slowed heat transfer, keeping the ice frozen much longer than exposed blocks. Ice preservation was basically medieval meal prep that lasted 6 months instead of 6 days. Families could harvest ice once in winter and use it to keep milk, butter, meat, and vegetables fresh well into spring and early summer. The cooling effect extended beyond just the ice itself. The cold air generated by the ice blocks created a microclimate in the storage area. Foods placed near the ice stayed significantly cooler than outside temperatures, slowing bacterial growth and preventing spoilage. Different ice pit designs served different purposes. Some families built compartmentalized pits with separate sections for different types of food. Others created sloped floors that channeled meltwater away from stored items. The most advanced designs included ventilation systems that maintained proper air circulation. Ice harvesting required timing and technique. The best ice formed during extended cold periods when lakes froze to depths of 12 inches or more. Thinner ice cracked easily during transport. Thicker ice provided better insulation and melted more slowly in storage. Storage organization maximized the cooling effect. Items that needed the coldest temperatures went closest to the ice blocks. Less perishable foods were placed in outer areas where temperatures were cool but not freezing. Medieval people understood thermal zones better than most modern homeowners understand their own refrigerators. Maintenance throughout the warmer months involved adding fresh insulation as needed, removing any spoiled items, and managing drainage. Well-maintained ice pits could provide cooling into late summer, extending the fresh food season by months. Some communities developed shared ice pits that served multiple families. These larger installations required more initial work, but provided cooling capacity that individual households couldn't achieve alone. Resource pooling made ice harvesting and pit maintenance more efficient for everyone involved. Ice pits were basically medieval air conditioning for food storage, powered entirely by winter weather and smart engineering. Perfect cooling meant nothing without foods that could actually benefit from extended storage, though. Part 2. Barley water and broth. Concentrates barley water and broth concentrates turned simple grains into liquid nutrition that could sustain families through food shortages. Medieval people discovered that boiling barley and other grains down into concentrated broths created nutrient-dense emergency food that stored well and provided essential calories when fresh ingredients became scarce. Medieval people basically invented protein powder centuries before anyone thought of putting nutrition labels on things. While we spend fortunes on supplement drinks, they were making concentrated nutrition from basic grains that cost almost nothing and lasted for months. The process involved slowly cooking barley in large amounts of water until the grains broke down and released their nutrients into the liquid. This wasn't quick cooking either. Proper broth concentrates required hours of gentle simmering to extract maximum nutrition from every grain. Different grains produced different nutritional profiles. Barley provided steady energy and fiber. Oats added protein and healthy fats. Wheat contributed B vitamins and minerals. Smart families combined multiple grains to create more complete nutritional coverage in their concentrated broths. The cooking process concentrated flavors and nutrients while reducing volume. 10 pounds of grain and water could cook down to 2 pounds of thick, nutrient-rich concentrate. This reduction made storage much easier while preserving most of the original nutritional value. Concentrated broths were like medieval energy drinks that actually gave you energy instead of just making you crash 2 hours later. One small portion mixed with hot water could provide substantial nutrition during times when solid food was difficult to find or prepare. Storage required sealed containers that prevented contamination and moisture exposure. Clay pots with tight-fitting lids worked well. Some families used wooden barrels lined with cloth. The goal was keeping air and pests away from the concentrated broth to prevent spoilage. Proper storage techniques could preserve broth concentrates for months. Cool, dry conditions were essential. Some families stored their concentrates in root cellars or other temperature-controlled areas. Regular inspection helped identify any signs of spoilage before entire batches were lost. Preparation for consumption was simple. Mix 1 part concentrate with 3 to 4 parts hot water. Add herbs or vegetables if available. The result was a nutritious soup that provided substantial calories and nutrients during lean periods when other foods weren't available. Quality control during cooking required attention to consistency and flavor. Properly made concentrates had thick, syrup-like consistency when cool. The flavor should be rich and grain-forward without any sour or off notes that indicated spoilage during the cooking process. Emergency rations made from these concentrates could sustain adults for days or weeks. The concentrated nutrition provided energy for work and daily activities even when other food sources failed due to weather, crop failures, or other disasters. Medicinal benefits were recognized too. Barley water helped with digestive issues. Oat-based concentrates provided steady blood sugar. These weren't just survival foods, but health foods that supported overall wellness during difficult times. Medieval families could turn a bag of grain into months of liquid nutrition using nothing but patience and a cooking pot. Liquid nutrition solved hunger temporarily, but long-term survival required preserving solid foods without them rotting away. Part 3. Ash and charcoal. Preservation. Ash and charcoal preservation used wood ash to protect vegetables and eggs from pests and decay during long-term storage. Medieval people discovered that ash's drying properties and natural alkalinity created hostile environments for bacteria, mold, and insects while keeping stored foods fresh for months without refrigeration. Medieval people basically turned fireplace waste into food-grade storage technology that worked better than most modern preservatives. While we throw away wood ash, they were using it to keep food fresh longer than anything you can buy at the grocery store today. Wood ash collection required burning hardwoods like oak, maple, or beech. These woods produced ash with the right mineral content and alkalinity levels for food preservation. Softwood ash from pine or cedar wasn't suitable because it contained compounds that could affect food flavor. The ash had to be properly prepared before use. Fresh ash was sifted to remove large charcoal pieces and unburned wood fragments. Only fine, powder-like ash was suitable for direct food contact. Some families further processed their ash by mixing it with small amounts of salt. Root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, and turnips were buried completely in ash-filled containers. The ash drew moisture away from the vegetable surfaces while creating an alkaline environment that prevented bacterial growth. Properly stored vegetables could last 6 months or more this way. Ash preservation was like putting vegetables in a time machine that paused decay until you were ready to eat them. Potatoes stored in ash came out months later looking almost exactly like they went in, just slightly drier but perfectly edible. Egg preservation used similar techniques. Fresh eggs were carefully buried in ash with pointed ends down to prevent air pockets from forming inside the shells. The ash prevented moisture loss while maintaining egg freshness for weeks longer than normal storage methods. Different vegetables required different ash preparation methods. Hard vegetables like beets and turnips could handle direct contact with ash. Softer vegetables needed cloth wrapping before ash burial. The goal was preventing moisture loss while avoiding direct chemical contact that might affect flavor. Container selection mattered for ash storage success. Wooden boxes lined with cloth worked well. Clay crocks provided excellent moisture protection. Stone containers offered the best pest protection. Whatever container was used needed tight-fitting lids to prevent moisture and pest infiltration. Charcoal pieces were used alongside ash for additional preservation benefits. Small charcoal chunks absorbed odors and provided extra drying capacity. The combination of ash and charcoal created optimal storage conditions for many different types of foods. Quality control required regular inspection of stored foods. Properly preserved items showed no signs of mold, soft spots, or pest damage. Any items showing deterioration were removed immediately to prevent contamination of other stored foods in the same container. Retrieval and preparation involved carefully removing vegetables from ash storage and brushing off residual ash particles. Most vegetables could be used immediately after cleaning. Some required brief soaking to restore optimal texture for cooking. Storage location affected preservation success. Cool, dry areas worked best. Basements or root cellars provided ideal conditions. Areas with temperature fluctuations or high humidity reduced the effectiveness of ash preservation methods significantly. Ash preservation turned kitchen waste into a preservation system that kept food fresh without any ongoing costs or maintenance requirements. Preserving garden vegetables was essential, but medieval people needed ways to find food when their stored supplies ran low. Part 4. Wild plant foraging and preservation. Wild plant foraging and preservation provided backup nutrition when cultivated crops failed or stored food ran out. Medieval people identified edible wild greens, nuts, berries, and roots that grew naturally in their areas, then developed techniques for drying and storing these finds to extend their usefulness through lean seasons. Medieval people basically had the original meal kit delivery service, except nature was the supplier and the delivery zone covered entire forests. While we pay premium prices for organic superfoods, they were finding the same nutritional powerhouses growing wild everywhere for free. Plant identification required knowledge passed down through generations. Families taught children which plants were safe to eat, when to harvest them, and how to prepare them properly. This knowledge often meant the difference between survival and starvation during difficult times. Seasonal timing was crucial for successful foraging. Spring provided tender greens like dandelion leaves, wild onions, and early berries. Summer brought mature fruits and seed pods. Fall offered nuts, late berries, and root vegetables. Each season required different foraging strategies and preservation methods. Wild greens were dried using simple air drying techniques. Leaves were spread on cloth or wooden frames in areas with good air circulation but protection from direct sunlight. Proper drying removed moisture while preserving nutrients and preventing mold growth during storage. Wild plant preservation was like creating a natural vitamin cabinet that restocked itself every season without any planting or maintenance required. Properly preserved wild plants provided essential nutrients that prevented deficiency diseases during long winters when fresh food was unavailable. Nuts required different preservation approaches. Most nuts needed thorough drying before storage to prevent rancidity. Some varieties were ground into flour-like powders that could be mixed with other ingredients or stored in sealed containers for extended periods. Berry preservation involved both drying and crushing techniques. Dried berries provided concentrated nutrition and natural sweetness. Crushed berries could be formed into cakes that preserved well and provided quick energy during travel or heavy work periods. Root vegetables from wild plants required careful cleaning and preparation. Some roots needed cooking before preservation to remove natural toxins or improve digestibility. Others could be dried raw and ground into nutritious powders for later use. Storage containers needed to protect preserved wild plants from moisture, pests, and contamination. Sealed clay pots worked well for powdered materials. Cloth bags allowed air circulation for items that needed continued drying. Wooden boxes provided protection for delicate dried materials. Quality control during preservation required understanding how properly dried plants should look, smell, and feel. Correctly preserved materials had specific color, texture, and aroma characteristics. Any signs of mold, pest damage, or off odors indicated preservation problems. Geographic knowledge helped families identify the best foraging locations in their areas. Different plants grew in different soil types, moisture levels, and sun exposure conditions. Experienced foragers knew exactly where to find specific plants during different seasons. Preparation methods varied depending on the intended use. Some preserved plants were eaten directly as snacks or trail food. Others were ground into powders for mixing with cooked grains. Some were used to make teas or medicinal preparations for health purposes. Medieval foragers could walk into any forest and come out with enough preserved nutrition to last weeks, using nothing but knowledge and basic drying techniques. Wild foraging provided backup nutrition, but families still needed reliable ways to keep everyday foods fresh without modern cooling systems. Part 5. Clay pot refrigeration. Zeer pots. Clay pot refrigeration used evaporation cooling to keep food fresh without ice or electricity. Medieval people placed smaller clay pots inside larger ones, filled the space between them with wet sand, then relied on evaporation to create cooling effects that preserved milk, butter, vegetables, and other perishables significantly longer than room temperature storage. Medieval people basically built air conditioners for food using nothing but pottery and sand, proving that good engineering beats expensive technology every single time. While we spend hundreds on refrigerators that break down, they created cooling systems that worked perfectly for decades without any repairs or energy costs. The construction process required 2 unglazed clay pots of different sizes. The inner pot needed to fit inside the outer pot with roughly 2 inches of space all around. Both pots needed to be made from porous clay that allowed water to seep through slowly. Wet sand filled the space between the 2 pots completely. The sand had to stay consistently moist to maintain the cooling effect. As water evaporated from the sand through the outer pot walls, it drew heat away from the inner pot, creating temperatures 10 to 15 degrees cooler than ambient air. Zeer pots were like having a refrigerator that ran on water instead of electricity and never needed defrosting or cleaning out mysterious leftovers. Fresh milk could stay good for days instead of hours. Vegetables remained crisp and fresh significantly longer than they would at room temperature. Placement location affected cooling efficiency. Areas with good air circulation helped evaporation work more effectively. Shaded spots prevented direct sun from heating the pots. Indoor locations provided protection from weather while maintaining the cooling benefits. Sand preparation required the right moisture content. Too dry and evaporation stopped working. Too wet and the cooling effect diminished. The sand should feel damp but not dripping wet. Regular water additions maintained optimal moisture levels for consistent cooling. Different foods responded differently to Zeer pot cooling. Dairy products like milk and butter benefited most from the temperature reduction. Fresh vegetables stayed crisp longer. Cooked foods remained safe to eat for extended periods compared to room temperature storage. Maintenance involved adding water to the sand every day or two, depending on climate conditions. Hot, dry weather required more frequent water additions. Humid conditions needed less frequent watering. The goal was maintaining consistent moisture in the sand layer. Size variations allowed different cooling capacities. Larger pots could cool more food, but required more water and space. Smaller versions worked well for individual portions or specific items like butter or cheese that needed consistent cooling protection. Climate considerations affected Zeer pot effectiveness. Hot, dry climates provided the best cooling results because evaporation worked most efficiently. Humid climates still provided cooling benefits, but with reduced temperature differences compared to ambient air temperatures. Construction quality mattered for optimal performance. Pots with cracks or chips allowed too much water loss. Glazed surfaces prevented proper evaporation. The best Zeer pots used locally made, unglazed pottery specifically designed for this cooling application. Cost effectiveness made Zeer pots accessible to most medieval families. Clay pots were inexpensive and locally available. Sand was free in most areas. Water was the only ongoing cost, and usage was minimal compared to the food preservation benefits provided. Zeer pot cooling could keep fresh food safe for days using nothing but clay, sand, and water, proving that simple physics beats complex technology for reliable results. Cooling fresh foods solved short-term storage problems, but medieval families needed ways to use every scrap of food without waste. Part 6. Breadcrust storage and usage. Breadcrust storage and usage turned hardened leftover bread into versatile ingredients that extended food supplies and prevented waste. Medieval people saved every bread crust developed techniques for grinding them into flour substitutes, and used them as thickeners in soups, proving that nothing edible should ever be thrown away. Medieval people basically invented food recycling centuries before anyone knew what sustainability meant, turning stale bread into ingredients that were sometimes more useful than the original loaf. While we throw away bread the moment it gets hard, they were transforming it into cooking ingredients that added nutrition and flavor to dozens of different dishes. Breadcrust collection required systematic saving of all leftover bread pieces. Crusts, heels, and stale slices were gathered daily and stored in dry containers until enough accumulated for processing. Even small fragments were saved because every piece contributed to the final product. Drying techniques prepared saved bread for long-term storage. Crusts were spread on cloth or wooden boards in areas with good air circulation. Complete drying prevented mold growth and made the bread pieces easy to grind into powder or smaller fragments. Grinding methods varied depending on available tools and intended use. Large pieces could be crushed with wooden mallets or rolling pins. Fine powder required stone grinding or mortar and pestle work. Different textures served different cooking purposes in medieval kitchens. Breadcrust flour was like getting a second harvest from grain that had already been turned into bread once, proving that medieval people understood resource efficiency better than most modern sustainability experts. Ground bread crusts could substitute for regular flour in many recipes or stretch limited flour supplies during lean periods. Storage containers needed to protect ground bread from moisture and pests. Sealed clay pots worked well for fine powders. Cloth bags allowed air circulation for coarser pieces. Wooden boxes provided protection while allowing easy access for daily cooking use. Soup thickening was one of the most common uses for saved bread crusts. Small pieces added directly to soup-absorbed liquid and provided body to thin broths. Ground bread powder dissolved completely, creating smooth, thick consistency without lumps or texture changes. Cooking applications included both sweet and savory preparations. Breadcrumbs mixed with eggs created binding agents for meat dishes. Sweet preparations combined ground crusts with honey or dried fruits for simple desserts that use minimal additional ingredients. Quality control required proper drying and storage to prevent spoilage. Correctly preserved bread pieces should be completely dry, free of mold, and have neutral odor. Any signs of deterioration meant immediate disposal to prevent contamination of other stored bread products. Nutritional benefits made bread crust usage particularly valuable during food shortages. Bread crusts retained most of the original grain nutrition while providing additional fiber and texture. Using every piece of bread maximized nutritional value from limited grain supplies. Seasonal variations affected bread crust preservation and usage. Summer required faster drying to prevent mold in humid conditions. Winter storage was easier but required protection from moisture and pests. Different seasons offered different opportunities for bread crust applications in cooking. Preparation techniques adapted bread products for specific uses. Soaking dried crusts in liquid restored soft texture for some applications. Toasting enhanced flavor for others. Different preparation methods created different ingredients from the same basic saved bread materials. Medieval kitchens could turn a week's worth of stale bread into enough cooking ingredients to last a month, proving that waste was a luxury they couldn't afford. Nothing edible ever left medieval kitchens without being used completely. Medieval people mastered survival through resourcefulness, creativity, and understanding that nothing should be wasted. Their techniques required no electricity, minimal tools, yet delivered results that kept entire communities fed through the harshest conditions imaginable.